Hello, this is Dr. Tirrell, and today we're going to take a look at a tutorial for Audacity. So here on the course calendar, you'll see there's a link for a Audacity or an Audacity tutorial there. If you go there, that's an online tutorial that I've set up for this class that walks us through some steps. So we're probably more or less going to be following this in the video. A couple of things to be aware of before we begin. One, the imagery in this tutorial is, for one thing, it's for a Mac. For another thing, it's a little bit out of date. It's for an earlier version of Audacity. Because of that, it's going to look slightly different from the Audacity that you use. Don't be confused by that. The tools and processes are the same, just some things look slightly different. So don't be confused there. Another thing to be aware of is that we're going over Audacity, which is an open source audio editing program. I like to teach with that because it's cross-platform and it's free, which means you can use it wherever without any cost. And there is also a portable version, which we'll look at briefly. What that means is you can install it on something like a USB drive, a little flash drive, and then take it from place to place if you need to be using computers in different areas, in class, in campus labs, at home, whatever. You can do that. It's a little bit tricky to do that. You have to know what you're doing. It's not that hard, but it is possible. So that's where I use Audacity for this. However, you are free to use any audio editing software you like. Another popular choice is something like GarageBand on the Mac side. And there's a version for iOS as well. That's a very usable, very popular tool. You can certainly use that if you'd like. You can use any other audio editing program you're familiar with. I'm not mandating that you use a particular tool. You just need to be able to export to an appropriate MP3 file or get it into that format. That is a requirement of the project, is that ultimately our audio is going to be served in MP3 format, which is by a huge margin the standard for podcasts. There's nothing inherently, you could serve it in another file format, but we're not going to, because MP3 guarantees to a high degree of certainty that anyone can use it, right? Anywho, so all that's to say, we're covering Audacity. You do not have to use Audacity. It has some advantages because it's free, it's cross-platform, it has a portable version. And it's also nice. I mean, it's a good usable tool. I use it, outside of class. I also use GarageBand, I use some other things, but Audacity is robust, it's popular. If you have questions, there's probably an answer. There's a good manual, those kinds of things. So our first step will be to download Audacity. This is the home page for it. You can see when you click on download, it's got binaries, so assembled versions for Windows, for Mac, for Linux. So you can go there and download it and install it on your computer. There is also, as I mentioned, a portable version, which I've got linked here as well. What that means is, as it says, you can place it on a USB drive on the storage section of an iPod. That it's not a music file that would be in the storage section. Portable hard drive, even a CD or whatever, and then you can carry it place to place. That's good if you're going to be working on a lot of different machines, because otherwise it's tricky to try and move all these disparate sound files. So you can download this and use a portable version. Some students have done that. Once you get that, the next thing you'll need is the MP3 encoder. Essentially what this means is you can edit audio through Audacity. You can export it in a bunch of different file formats. By default, you can't export it to MP3, and you might wonder why that is. Hold on a second. Sorry, I needed a drink. The reason why is the MP3, the main encoding algorithm, the format itself is unencumbered by copyright. It's just a format, more or less. I mean, that's the simple explanation. But what you have to use to put something into MP3 format, why MP3 is much, much smaller than raw audio, is because of an encoding algorithm. Okay, it's a lossy encoding algorithm. The sound quality is not quite as good as raw audio, but it's so much smaller that it makes things like online distribution possible, right? If you could only use raw audio, the file size would be so huge, it would take forever to download a file. You couldn't do podcasts. We wouldn't have, online music. Not really. So, it's this huge boon, but the main encoding algorithm for MP3 is intellectual property. The Fraunhofer actually Institute owns it, but they don't control the file format. So open source methods for encoding to MP3 have popped up, right? And they've been around for a long time. This is not new. Because the main MP3 algorithm was essentially copyrighted, its intellectual property, open source equivalents popped up pretty quickly. And the way that actually works is the decoding algorithm is freely distributed. So programs can decode for free. It's only encoding that the organization that owns that encoder algorithm, they charge companies to encode. So something like iTunes, where you can rip music to MP3 or something like that, they actually do pay a licensing fee in order to be able to encode. One open source MP3 encoder is called LAME. That is probably an acronym. It's sort of shrouded in mystery. It's probably what's called a backronym, or a recursive acronym, where the name LAME actually was the algorithm, or excuse me, the acronym was put in later, and it may be self-referential. So the L in LAME may be lame. None of this really matters. The point is that's an open source MP3 encoding system, and you can download it for free. It can't be distributed with Audacity because of the way intellectual property works. Those can't be paired together. You just have to get them separately, and then you can use them together, but they can't be distributed together. So I've linked for where you can go to download the LAME MP3 encoder. I know this page looks crazy. It looks like you're going to get a virus from this. This is actually the correct page. The reason why is LAME by default is distributed as source code. This is where you go to actually get binaries. If you're familiar with open source software, that's a common model. They'll only give away source code, and it'll be someone else's responsibility to put those into things that work with particular programs, and then they distribute them separately. So you can download that, for Windows. Right here, you can get an exe where it's an installation package. It'll just, you can run it and it'll install LAME for you. You can get a compressed zip. Mac side, same kind of thing. You can get a executable as a DMG, a disk format. You'll just need to install LAME, and then once that's done, you're pretty much good to go. You will the first time, as the tutorial says down here at the bottom, the first time you want to export your audio to MP3, you have to tell Audacity where the LAME encoder is, but you only have to do that once. So once you've done those two things, you're ready to go, and then you can open up Audacity as it says here. I'm going to actually switch over here to my Audacity installation. So I've got this running in a separate window here. The rest of the tutorial is basically looking at Audacity. So you can, after this video, follow along or go through the online tutorial. I am asking everyone to do that because it walks you through these steps. And ultimately, when we do our workshop, you're going to need to be familiar with this. So anywho, the first thing to do is just take a look at the interface here, and you can see some familiar things, right? This looks like an audio player. You got play and pause and stop and record. You've got right here some different tools that we're going to take a look at. You got a selection tool, an envelope tool, which we'll look at, the zoom to zoom in and out. This is the time shift tool. Those are the main ones you're going to be using. And then we've got some other things like levels, input levels, where to select inputs and outputs, but it's really not that cluttered of an interface. And you'll see on the online tutorial that I have a link to the manual there. In fact, I'm briefly just going to pull that over and show you. This manual is actually quite good. It breaks down the different interface elements. And then it has short tutorial here about how to edit an audio file, how to make your own recording, how to mix voice and background music. All of these are directly applicable to podcasting, right? So our project. And they are really kind of useful. It looks a lot like Wikipedia. It uses the the same system, the Wikimedia system. So if you're familiar with Wikipedia, and odds are you are, this interface will look familiar. It'll walk you through how to do this. Okay, so back to Audacity here. The first thing we want to do is just start recording. So if you've got a mic built into your computer, or if you have a USB mic, and you can't actually check those out from us, you're ready to go already. You just need to make sure that here under this microphone icon, you've selected the appropriate one. Mine's this USB audio device. And really all you have to do is just hit the record button, which is this red circle. It looks like record. And let's watch what happens when I do that. Okay, hello, my name is Jeremy. This is my first test recording. Now I'm going to hit stop. That's the stop button over here. You can see what happens is it gives us this waveform as it's going along. That just means a visualization of audio data. Why there's two of them is because it's recording in stereo by default. We're going to go ahead and leave that the way it is. When we export, we're probably going to crunch it down to mono just because it's so much smaller. And for podcasting, that does matter, right? We can click stop here. We can click skip to start. That's, it jumps. It's not a rewind. You don't have to hold it. And when we click play, we'll see what we've got. Okay, hello, my name is Jeremy. This is my first test recording. Now I'm going to hit stop. Okay, so we've recorded. That's how that works pretty much. Just a couple other things to point out. One, if I click record again, it's going to start a new track. And just to sort of let you know in advance, it's going to keep playing this other one, right? So if I record a new one, it's going to be playing this as I talk. Let me show you what I mean. So here's my new one.
Hello, my name is Jeremy.
You can barely hear me now, right? See, because it was playing this as I was recording again. And if we click play, it's just going to sound like a jumble.
Here's my hello, my name is Jeremy.
Right? Just be aware of that. You can mute tracks so that if I want to add some more spoken audio, this will mute it so it will record, but it won't play these other this track. So I'm going to mute that now. Now I'll hit record. Okay, so this is new text, excuse me, new audio, new spoken words. You can hear it's silent. Okay, so now that's muted. If I unmute it, it'll play them together.
Okay, hello, my name is Jeremy.
But if I want one to come right after the other, I can use this little arrow up here called the time shift tool. Click that, and now I can move these to the right and left, which essentially means earlier or later in time. Right? So I can actually just kind of stack these up. Stop, click, go to the beginning.
Okay, hello, my name is Jeremy. This is my first test recording. Now I'm going to hit stop. Okay, so this is new text, excuse me, new audio.
Okay, so you see how that works. You can just slide these forward and backward in time. You can just click record. It'll start making a new track. You do just have to be aware that it's just going to keep playing unless you individually mute things. Occasionally, you'll actually want to keep something playing, particularly if, as I advise, you're recording with headphones on. Sometimes, if you need to get the timing down, or if you, want to listen to something that's playing back so that you know when to come in and speak, like a clip or something like that, then you'll go ahead and keep the audio going. It's just something to be aware of. This other thing, solo, means that it'll mute everything else, by the way, that button next to it, if you have a whole bunch of tracks. And you can add as many as you'd like until you run out of memory. If you just want one, you can just click solo there. These other things can make the volume of the track much softer or much higher. This is the individual gain. We don't really need to get into that. And the one underneath it pans it left and right. Sometimes you do need to deal with this gain in order to make everything sound at a consistent level. If you've got external audio that's quite soft, you may need to pump its gain way up or way down if it's much louder, just to make sure that all the audio sounds kind of at the same level when you're finished. You can do that for individual clips, as we'll see in just a second here, individual snippets inside. But if you want to deal with whole tracks, you do that over here. All right, so I'm going to just get rid of these two because they were just examples. Now they're gone. I've got nothing. Now I'm going to actually just do a test recording here as if I were recording a podcast, right? So I'll hit record. Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast is. And here I'm making a mistake, so I'll cut this out, and we'll look at how to do that. We've got an exclusive interview with local Wilmington artist Joe Smith. Here's a clip from that. And stick around because there's lots more to come. All right, so that's me recording my podcast, right? So let's give that a listen real quick. Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast is. And here I'm making a mistake, so I'll cut this out, and we'll look at how to do that. All right, so I intentionally threw that in so we can look at how do you actually edit audio, right? How do you, like you do with text, change things, put things together? The answer is we use this selection tool. You can hear that I've got an intentional mistake right here in the middle. Let's listen to that again to see where the mistake is. And we can see this bar. Whatever the name of my podcast is. And here I'm making a mistake, so I'll cut this out, and we'll look at how to do that. Right, so we can see when that bar is playing where the mistake occurs. We can see it represented visually in the waveform. So I know I need to cut all this out. I'm just going to select it. You can actually just delete it out. Now, I hit backspace and nothing happened. Why was that? Sometimes this frustrates people. It's because in Audacity, in order to change anything, you have to stop the playhead first. Right now, it's just paused, and I can't make any changes, right? So I have to stop it. That's just something to be aware of because sometimes that frustrates people. They can't figure out what's going wrong. Now when I click backspace, it deletes it, right? And now let's listen to it again. Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast is. We've got an exclusive interview with local Wilmington artist Joe Smith. Here's a clip from that. And stick around because there's lots more to come. Okay, and now I introduced the clip, but I didn't have the clip, did I? Here's a clip from that. All right, so I'm going to need to import my external clip that I want to insert right in this blank spot. Now, the way to do that is go up here to File and Import. And I want to import some audio. Now, I already have my audio clip ready to go. It's here under Interview. And here it's asking, do you want to copy it into the project or leave it in its current place on my desktop? Generally, you're going to want to copy it into your files. If you're going to move stuff anywhere, you need to have it there. Otherwise, if it's reading from that location, it's always going to expect it to be wherever it was, so on my desktop. You can imagine if I did that on a school computer and then I went somewhere else, it wouldn't have that file. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Okay, and there's my interview. Now when I click play, everything's going to play at once, right? And stick around.
I had a strange dream where all of us...
Right, so I just want to hear my interview right now, so I'm going to click solo.
I had a strange dream where all of us were at some sort of grad school reunion.
Okay, so there's a clip of my interview. And now I know I want to place it here on this blank spot, right, where I introduce my clip. Here's a clip from that. And okay, so I'm just going to move it down there with the old time shift tool. Okay, so now let's hear what that sounds like. Just as a quick tip here, you can actually just click up here in the timeline and it'll start to play immediately. That's a good way just to hear everything you need to rather than going all the way back to the beginning. Here's a clip from that.
I had a strange dream where all of us were...
Okay, so that's at the right place, but I didn't leave enough time, right? That clip is like what, 10 seconds? Yeah, it's about 10 seconds. So I'm going to need to split this up. I can do what's called splitting this clip. Let's see, let's edit. Where is it? Clip boundaries, I think. Yeah, split. Right, and now I've actually got two separate clips here. So I can do that and just shift this to the back. That's probably, one of the easier ways to do it. But there's something else you could do, which is I can put my selection tool at this point. I know this clip's about 10 seconds. So I'm going to go to Generate Silence, and I'm going to put, let's say, change this to seconds. Let's put about, 12 seconds. Okay, and now it's inserted 12 seconds of silence. And then what I could do is actually just back this up. Now, why would you want to do one rather than the other? If you want to keep this whole clip together, you know, if you need to do time shifting later, then now this is all still one clip. If you do the split, it puts them into different chunks. And that may be advantageous in different places. You know, if you want to just move one part of the clip without moving the rest. So, you know, they're different tools for different things. For purposes right now, it doesn't matter too much, but I'm going to insert the silence just so I can show you how to do that, but also so to keep this all as one clip. Okay, now let's go ahead and start here and listen.
Artist Joe Smith. Here's a clip from that.
I had a strange dream where all of us were at some sort of grad school reunion thing, and Jeremy kept telling a story that involved Buffalo Wild Wings.
And stick around because there's lots more to come.
All right, so that sounds, you know, fine. One thing also, now that I've added a few clips and it's getting longer, you know, we're at 30 seconds or so, I can't see everything the way I'd like to. I'm going to click on this zoom tool. And if you click on the zoom tool, it's going to zoom in, right? You see how the scale of seconds up here changes? Now we're at half seconds. Now we're at tenths, right? So you can zoom in a lot further. Sometimes you need to do that in order to select very specific parts of timelines, right? But if you want to see everything better, then you just right click and it'll zoom out. And now I can kind of see everything together, right? So that's the zoom tool. Okay, another thing I want to do, because it's a podcast, is I want to have an intro little jingle, right? And if you take a look at our tutorial, let me drag that over. I've linked to CC Mixter, which is a place you can go to get open source. Well, it's Creative Commons licensed audio. That's what the CC is, essentially. Creative Commons, we've discussed, or we touched upon in class. What that is a license that sits above copyright. You can't get rid of copyright. That's, you know, that's federal law. Creative Commons, if you make something, you can add this Creative Commons license, which then gives people the right to use it in particular ways. So they can remix it, they can share it. You get to decide what rights they have. I've linked to CC Mixter here. This is a way to find Creative Commons audio. And notice it says over 1 million videos in games. That's essentially what this site does. It gives you music to be used in things like YouTube videos, podcasts, video games. And it has a Creative Commons license, which means you're allowed to use it provided you meet certain conditions. Okay, so there's a lot of ways to search here. You could just Google for something like, you know, intro music. Or excuse me, search. You're not Googling, you're searching. I now say Google instead of search, but it is search. And you can see it'll pull up something related to that. And then it'll also give you all these different tags, right? Different artists you could check, or tagged genres, right? Intro, music, music box. You could alternately just use something like this tag search, which breaks it down into categories. Like what if I wanted, you know, something with bells in it from the 80s, right? There's 120 of those. Are there any that fit into acid jazz? Yeah, okay. And you can expand the filters here, and you'll notice it has instrumental only because a lot of this is used as background music, right? So that's really helpful for us. I'm going to clear stuff here. Let's say smooth jazz or something like that. Murder? That's smooth jazz. Let's see what we've got here. Wow, that is smooth. That is a smooth tune. Sunday morning, maybe. Yeah, that actually is kind of right on point with what I'm looking for. And it is instrumental. I'm checking here, and I don't hear any words. You can, of course, filter by instrumentals, right? Slip into something more jazzy. No, I think we'll go with Sunday morning. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to click this little download from the cloud thing here. And now this is important. It brings up the attribution window, right? Because it's Creative Commons, there are going to be stipulations, and you do have to attribute to people, right? You can get it in plain text or HTML. I'm going to get it in both because I might need to use both for our podcast. I might be able to put it in plain text, and this is just giving credit to the person who made it. Or I might be able to embed it in the web page we have to create. I'm going to get both just to be safe. I'm going to copy to clipboard here. Okay. Here it is in plain text. And then to be safe, I'm just going to get the HTML as well. And it'll tell me the title there, Sunday morning. So if I ever need to come back here, I can just find it directly without a lot of searching. But we do need to provide attribution. And you can see it gives us the stipulation here, non-commercial projects only. That's fine. This isn't a commercial thing, this podcast. So I'm just going to download this. And it's downloading here. I'm going to wait till it finishes before I close, although it'll be fine. Okay, so now that's downloaded. I'm going to go back to Audacity here. And I can insert this just as I did my interview, right? And you'll notice that the interview, it was a mono track. See, it only has one instead of two. That's because it was recorded in mono, and that's how you can tell. Let me import my audio, so I'll get that background. There it is, Sunday morning. Boom. And you can see that's about 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So this is our same audio. It's just that the window is going to stretch in order to accommodate whatever you import. So because that was so much longer, now everything has been shrunk. I can zoom in a little bit further if I'd like here. And I'm not going to use all of this. So let's go ahead and listen to this all together because I want to point something out. So stop and go to the beginning.
Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast.
All right, so a couple of things. One, you can't hear me because of the background audio, right? And the other is I start talking right away. What I really want to have is a little bit of background audio play, then I'll start talking, right? And then we'll drop out this music a bit. So there are a few things to do here. First, we want to move our tracks, right? Because we want to have some background music playing first. So I'll time shift. And I'm just going to move this to about here. I'm going to have to move the other clip as well. Okay, let's move that a little bit earlier. That's probably good right there. Let's take a listen.
And welcome.
Yeah, that's good. That gives time for the beat to drop, and then I come in. Let me resync this back up.
I had a strange dream.
I want to mute that so I can hear.
Here's a clip from that.
I had a strange dream where all of us were at some.
Yeah, and you can see why, if you're going to be moving tracks, why sometimes inserting silence is better than splitting clips, because then you have to move everything. Now, you can't actually start to join them together and link them all at once. We won't cover this here. There are ways to mitigate that, but it's just something you have to be aware of. Like anything else, you got to be aware of how tools work. All right, so let's unmute this. Now, let's listen to how that begins. That's actually pretty good. But one thing I want to point out is you can add all these different effects to clips. Some of them, are actually sort of augmenting things. You can amplify sections if, sections are quiet and you want to emphasize that. You can do things like echoes, and you can pitch shift. You can change pitches, reverb, that kind of thing. One that you'll use quite a bit is fade in and fade out, right? I mean, that's a very sort of standard tool. So the way that works is we use our selection tool. We select a portion of audio. We make sure it's stopped, the playhead. And then we just slap on our effect, right? So I'm going to fade in. And you can see what that's kind of done is it's automatically faded over the course of my selection. Now let's go ahead and take a listen to that now. Okay, you can see how that brings it up, right? It doesn't just start on all at once. It brings it up quietly. right, so we got our fade in. The music is still playing while I'm talking. We could just completely get rid of it, just make this quiet. But let's listen to that, because I bet you we're not going to be too happy about how that sounds.
Hello, and welcome to whatever the name.
That sounds kind of amateurish, it just cuts, and then I start talking. I don't like how that sounds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's called ducking. And what that means is having two tracks playing simultaneously, but one of them is much, much quieter. It's softer. It's background music while my talking is going on. Now, there actually is an effect to use what's called auto duck, and that'll duck for you. But you have to structure your tracks in a particular way to do that. And because it's automatic, you don't have fine-grained control. The better thing to learn, probably, so at least you know how this process works, is this tool up here called the envelope tool. When I click that, notice how you get these bars on the top and bottom of all your tracks. And what that is it allows you to put different points in your audio tracks, and then you can use those points to have fine-grained control over the sound, the background sound of this, right? So what I'm going to do, we're talking about levels when I say sound, is I'm going to put a point right here where I start talking, okay? Because that's where I want this to be at its low point. And then I'm going to put another point a little bit further back. And now what I can do, since I have these 2 points, is I can actually drag the volume up and down. You see how that works? That's why it's called the envelope tool, essentially, is it allows you to do this. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to squeeze it a little bit further. And you can see it's sloping. It doesn't immediately cut. It starts to fade out kind of quickly. Right here, the gap it's fading out kind of, over a second or two. I'm going to slide this forward a little bit, which you can do. Right? Slide it backward and forward because I have the handles to make that dip a little bit faster. I'm going to put it right here so that it's ducking pretty quickly. Let's listen to that.
Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my...
Okay, do you see how much better that sounds than just cutting straight out? I'm going to zoom in just a hair here and go back to envelope tool, make this even quieter so that it's just sort of in the background, but it's not taking focus.
Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast is.
Okay, it's there, but it's not interrupting the speaker. Zoom back out a hair. Okay, so that's going to play. It's going to hit that external audio, the interview. And then what I want to do is make sure this ducks back up. So I'm going to put the envelope tool back on. I'll put another point right about here where I stopped talking. And then a little bit further, I'm going to put another point. And then I'm just going to click and slide that back up. And now what that's going to do is very quickly bring the audio level back up. So let's listen to that.
And stick around because there's lots more to come.
Okay, so that's just the introduction to my podcast. The last thing I would probably do, at least for the purposes of our tutorial here, is I'm going to get rid of a lot of this. I'd probably have this at the end also. I'd probably use the same song. So I just re-import it, when I do file import audio. For our purposes here at the beginning, I'm going to go ahead and chop this. Actually, I'm going to say about here. And I'm going to use this little trick up here that is under Edit, Select. I'm going to go from cursor to track end, and that's just going to select the rest. Make sure it's stopped. Delete. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is select this and slap on a fade out. All right. So right here is probably where I'd begin the podcast proper. I would go ahead and mute all of these, and I'd start recording. So hello, this is the actual substance of the podcast, and blah, blah, blah. So I'll move this to sync up. And I'll unmute all these tracks. All right, so we've done our intro. Then we actually started the podcast proper. I'm actually going to do this other little trick. If you click on these arrows at the bottom of tracks, it doesn't delete anything. It just hides that information. That way you can kind of see everything all at once. See how everything's now a lot smaller and easier to see. I'm going to go to the beginning and just listen to everything we've got. Fades in. That is smooth.
Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast is. We've got an exclusive interview with a local Wilmington artist, Joe Smith. Here's a clip from that.
I had a strange dream where
Got a
all
clip
of
from
us
the
were
interview.
some sort of grad school reunion thing, and Jeremy kept telling a story that involved Buffalo Wild Wings.
And stick around because there's lots more to come.
Ducks back up.
So hello, this is the actual substance of the podcast.
And then we do that fade out. I'd probably have a longer fade out. That fade out was pretty quick for my tastes. But you see how that works, right? And then I'd continue with the substance of my podcast there. So there it is. And I mean, that's actually, you know, we did a few steps. But once you get the hang of this, you can knock this out really quickly. And it gives us an overview of all these different great tools we've got, right? How you can just record audio directly. And then you can input or import other audio, you know, things like jingles and interviews and sound effects, right? What podcast doesn't have some sound effects? How you can edit stuff using the selection tool, apply effects, you know, fades in, fade ins, fade outs. You can amplify sections if you need to. We didn't go over that, but it's self-explanatory, and we can cover it in the workshop that's coming up. The time shift tool, that's super important. How to make sure that different things sync up the way they should, right? And then things like the envelope tool so that we can fine grain or with a fine grained hand control ducking. And the zoom tool so that we can get a better look at things. In fact, open these back up so we can see our waveforms pretty clearly, and I'll zoom out to get a good look at everything. All right, so that's the gist of how everything works. Our last step is, since this is a podcast, we want to export to MP3. We can do that under File and Export Audio. And now we have some different choices of formats here. For a podcast, oh, you know what? Before we do this, sorry, I'm going to go to File and Save because this is something to point out. When we save this, we're not saving it as an MP3 or anything like that. We're saving this as an Audacity project, which means all of this stuff is just data. And it gives us a warning here, right? When you save this as a project, it's an Audacity project. It's not an audio file. You can't play it on anything. It's just like it's a Word file, you know, or an Excel file or something like that. So you have to use export if you want an audio file. I want to save this project because I'm not quite finished. I got to come back and, you know, do the end and all that. Actually, I got to do the middle and the end. So I'm going to call this, you know, podcast. Save it here on my desktop. Okay. And now I've got that saved. This is the data that goes with it, and this is the file itself. I could, if I wanted to, you know, close this. I'll shut down Audacity. I can come back later on and just start it back up, and everything will be in place, right? All of these separate tracks have been saved separately here in the folder. You won't be able to understand any of this. It's just for the program. But you remember when it asked if I wanted to copy stuff over or leave it in place, that's why I wanted to copy it over. So everything now is together. Otherwise, it'll just look for files, you know, here on the desktop. If I got rid of this, you know, if stuff changed, it wouldn't be able to find it. It wouldn't be in my, my file anymore. Okay, so now, last step, export audio. We want to export this as an MP3. The first time you do that, as I say, it'll ask where the MP3 encoder is, where lame is, and you'll have to tell it where that is. I've already done that, you know, because I've used this so much. So I'll call this, you know, episode whatever. It's an MP3. Okay, it's going to mix them down to two stereo channels. And then this is the tag data, the ID3 tag data that shows up, you know, in things like iTunes. I would want to change this. Right now, it's actually, by default, it's picked up that stuff from the background music. So, you know, I'd put the name of my podcast or whatever. The track would be the episode title. Oops. Probably put the podcast here as well. You know, put the year. Copyright message would probably be to me, but I may want to add in the comments that I'm using that audio, right? Okay. And now it's going to spit that out. You'll notice that when we did that, it didn't ask us things like, do you want it to be a stereo or mono track, or how much quality do you want that MP3 to have? I just used the default that's in there. If you click options here, it's going to let you set this, and Audacity has some built-in ones. It defaulted to the best possible quality. For a podcast, you're probably not going to want to do that. We won't get into this too deeply in our project because it's a little above and beyond. But because file size is important in podcasts, you know, if you're talking for half an hour and you're using high quality encoding, that file could be gigantic. I mean, you know, most songs are a couple of minutes. Podcast could be, you know, an hour. Ours don't have to be that long, but, you know, for the future. So you can knock down the quality and you don't lose much. I'm going to leave it as constant bit rate. I'm going to knock down the quality to 96, actually. Oh, it's not letting us select that here. We actually have to do that up here. We have to knock these down under tracks to convert to mono, stereo track to mono. So you do have to do that there. But we'll look at these options during the workshop. It's just something to be aware of. It exported there's my MP3. So you can see this is an MP3. I could check the properties here. It's a couple of megabytes, and see that was, you know what, 40 seconds or something like that. That's because it's at high quality. Let's go ahead and open this up with just, you know, VLC. And now this is a fully functioning audio file. You know, this is a podcast.
Hello, and welcome to whatever the name of my podcast is. We've got an exclusive interview with local Wilmington artist Joe Smith. Here's a clip from that.
Anyway, you get the gist. So that's what we've got. Remember, this goes in lockstep with our tutorial. Let me just pull that up. So you'll want to go through that after you've watched this video. We're actually going to have a workshop in class. Let's see, it looks like on the 31st. We're going to get some exposure to doing this. After watching this, you'll do a brief check that you know, make sure you're familiar with some of the tools we covered here today. All right, that's what I've got. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me as always. Otherwise, I will see you guys in class. All right.